so I want you all to know that what I say next does not reflect any sense of violence I have against real kids. I want to kick this toddler over the fence. I'm sick of this kid.
He's got PBS, perfect baby syndrome.
Alright, hello everyone and welcome to Chatty AF, the anime feminist podcast. We look at Japanese pop culture through an intersectional feminist lens, and today we are turning our microscope on the spring 2024 season. I'm Alex, one of the managing editors here at AniFem. I also write fiction and write about fiction. You can find me very sporadically on Blue Sky at AR Henderson, and I'm joined today by Toni and Peter.
Hey everybody, I am Toni. I'm a contributing editor here at Anime Feminist. You can find me on most platforms at Poet Pedagogue.
I'm Peter Phobian. I'm an editor here at Anime Feminist, and I am Peter Phobian on Blue Sky.
Alright, so welcome to the spring season, where the train schedule is truly apocalyptic, and Omega is more than just a watch brand. As always, the industry is producing an untenable amount of anime every season, so we can't cover everything, and I've narrowed things down to a handful of titles, some voted by our patrons, and some added to the mix that we felt like were worth digging into. If you, listener, want to help influence the rundown of these seasonal coverage episodes, hey, you can head on over to patreon.com/animefeminist. Also, as always, we're using our Premiere Digest to determine the order that we talk about these shows, starting at the bottom and working our way up all the way towards feminist potential. The Digest categories are based on our early impressions of the shows, so they do have the potential to potentially, move around during their runtime, but we'll keep them in that original order just for clarity. Having said that, though, we're actually doing something a little different this time. Toni, do you want to tell us about oh my god, what's it called?
No. Dead Demons DEDEDEDE Destruction. Yes.
Was that a Bobo reference?
Yes.
Yes, it was, Peter.
I think we're just scatting at this point.
I love it.
Yeah, so we're going to be having a premiere review of this show coming up pretty soon, but we're waiting until episode 1 comes out to do an official premiere review. The reason we're doing that is that this is actually episode 0. So this show, for some reason, I don't know why, they decided to shift a side story from, I'm assuming, somewhere in the middle of the manga to the beginning. So it opens with the story of one of the characters' dads, who is this depressed manga editor, and he's kind of dealing with the aftermath of the invasion 8 years later, and it's a very strange way, I think, to shift things around, because I also read the opening chapter of the manga, and I have to admit, I like the opening chapter of the manga much, much, much more.
Same.
The manga actually opens almost within 3 pages with a panel where characters are talking about how they wonder whether everything is just kind of conspiracy caused by the American military-industrial complex. But maybe that's just a crazy thing. And if this show, the manga could not make it any more explicit that this is an allegory for the Okinawan military base that America put after World War II. That there's absolutely no way that it could make it more explicit, right? After that, it shifts into this, everyday life, the girls, just being thirsty for boys, blowing off tests, various things, and then one of the girls just says the girls are kind of looking off in the direction, in the distance, and talking to each other. We don't know what they're looking at, and it's the most horny, they're having the most horny conversation in the universe, and then we see this thing they're looking at, it's a spaceship, and then it's a title drop. And the contrast between the spaceship, the horny conversation, leading to a title drop is just the most perfect way to start the series, right?
Yep.
And this beautiful blend of goofy slice of life with something very sinister and dark going on in the background, with a critique of the American military-industrial complex. Just chef's kiss. Mwah. The series, this premiere, though, is one of the most depressing things I've ever seen.
Oh no.
It's very depressing. It's beautiful, but and it's well done. It doesn't quite capture to me the absolute astonishing beauty of the manga panels. My issue with it is that it introduces a whole bunch of... It's kind of like the G-Witch prologue, only without the political intrigue of the G-Witch prologue.
That's a good comparison, yeah.
A bunch of characters that aren't actually going to really matter in the course of the series, right? Mm-hmm. Well, and even in the G-Witch prologue, the characters matter a little bit more than in this one, right?
Yeah. I can say, just to your earlier statement, I think I'm like 7 or 8 volumes in. It's been a long time since I read it, but I have no recollection of these events at all. So I am not sure where in the manga, if it even is in the manga or like somewhere else, maybe an online-only chapter, that this event occurs. So it is very out of place, yes.
It is such a weird way to open the movie, and I know that the movie also has an anime original ending, according to Crunchyroll. So, could be anime original. Who knows? But it does leave me wondering whether... I normally am a huge Reiko Yoshida fan. I love her work on, I like her work on A Silent Voice, but I adore her work with Hikimonogatari, and which is, very respectful, where she makes very respectful additions to the source material, in ways that I think add to it. But I'm concerned about whether this adaptation is going to really appreciate what makes the manga special tonally and substance-wise in its allegories about the Okinawan military base, which, as my friend who's an Okinawan indigenous scholar has talked about, led to many women going missing, water supplies being poisoned, all sorts of horrible adverse reactions, and very similar to in Dead Demons DEDEDEDE Destruction, it's like you're expected to just have everything day life go on as usual, right? In the midst of this ridiculous thing popping up in your backyard.
Yeah, it's a lot of trying to live a normal life in the face of kind of total annihilation and not, and ennui, and kind of like a lot of cynicism about whether, say, going to school has any meaning if you're not even sure you're going to live long enough to have a career, that type of thing.
Yeah. Oh, so relatable nowadays, honestly. My kids often feel that way when I'm teaching. Yeah, no, so I don't know. I feel like this is one to look out for. I think this is definitely one where I think my feelings about the show are really going to ride on that second episode and seeing how they adapt whether and how they adapt the first manga volume, chapter of the manga, because they better do a good freaking job. Because it deserves.
Yeah, I think this is episode 0 because it is something they put out of order, and I'm hoping they just pick up a chapter 1 on episode 1 after that, but yeah, we'll see.
Okay, that sounds fascinating. Interesting. All right, well, that is, has showed up a little bit out of our
literally yesterday.
Literally yesterday, in the middle of when everything is up to episode 6 and 7. So we'll just see where that ends up and talk about it as needed on these seasonal episodes. Back to our regularly scheduled programming, though. Next, we want to talk about Mysterious Disappearances. Toni, how is this one going?
I like so much about it. I'm so happy to say all of the problems that I talked about in the premiere review are more or less gone, The fan service slowly declines over the course of the show until now it's basically non-existent. Sumi Reiko, the protagonist, remains wonderful, and she's really taking an agentic role, doing investigations, being the head of the investigations, and the irritating kind of male co-lead gets put on a bus, which I appreciate, and he's basically gone for this middle section of episodes.
Cool, that's the same thing you said about
Araragi, yeah.
Okay, that seems to be a tried and true method of improving shows.
I've really loved reading Rebecca Silverman's reviews on ANN. I would just want to shout those out because she's really going into kind of how it's building on kind of folklore traditions in a similar way to, say, Other Side Picnic is. And I think that it's doing a really good job of kind of respecting the origins and how folklore transmutes itself over time and kind of stories combine and diffuse. And also it's just got this very casual exploration of queerness that, I mean, there's some irritating characters. There's, the bathhouse girl who has to, like, be, trying to cop a look at the boobies of the women in the bathhouse. But she fails to, and also it does not lead to any particular fan service moments, which is astonishing, because usually that sort of character is almost always the audience surrogate for weird horny bros. But other than that, I mean, like, the school that Oto goes to is kind of this spoof of the Maria-sama Watches Over Us, the Maria Watches Over Us school, only with, only the girls are actually horny, which I appreciate. They are so horny, and I love that for them. They just want to know they just want to know what sex is like, and, like, especially, like, lesbian sex. They're lovely. The most recent episodes have been a really interesting exploration of using ghost stories to explore social issues, which is always my favorite way of, for supernatural stories to use their folklore. I mean, that's why I love Monogatari. And I really felt the most recent episodes elevated the show with their explorations of grief and social abandonment. How do people cope with that? Which seems to be the theme of this show, is how do people cope with social abandonment and the different ways, like, I mean, lashing out, trying to change society through, this punitive view of justice, or forming very intimate bonds that can sustain you but aren't quite enough,
That's good. That's good to know. Awesome. The next stop on our journey today, if you'll permit a very obvious train pun, is Train to the End of the World. I am interested in this one, but very behind on it. How's it going? How's it tracking?
Well, apparently I stopped just before the part that it most mirrors discussion. I think landed on episode 6 or 7 with the zombies, which did include... I don't know if this is I see there was a note about fan service. I know it had the thing about like the zombies' heads exploding with panties, which was a gag I didn't really need.
Oh.
I think you're just one episode behind, Peter, because you've seen the panties gag, right?
Yeah. I did appreciate when Shinonome did the lewd, like, 18th century poetry to get the zombies to explode. I felt like that was a much funnier.
I think it was excerpts from D.H. Lawrence.
But I don't know if is that the fan service that you had made the notation about? The panty flashes that come.
It was the panty flash, which I didn't find particularly horrible. It was like, okay, well, It was literally like less than a second and not framed in a way that's particularly titillating. But then again, maybe I just have bad taste. And then...
I mean, it wasn't egregious, just kind of like disappointing.
Yeah, it was just kind of like, really, we didn't need that.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I didn't like was the episode afterwards, I felt was kind of slapdash. It was very self-indulgent and pretentious to me. Like, it was clearly trying to rewrite Alice in Wonderland using, like, goofy anime tropes and kind of the joke of the, like, the anime show that is clearly far too mature for its target audience. But it ended up feeling like there were things that were not deeply enough explored. Like, at the very beginning of the episode, all the girls' most horrifying memories were force-fed them, Asuka in Evangelion style, while they were passing through a station. But that only lasts for literally 10 seconds before they go right through the station. But then that's brought back in the middle of the episode to give Nadeko, like, some big dramatic moment where she can kind of build on the lesson she learned from that horrifying trauma, and show how she's grown from it, but it feels completely and utterly unearned. And it still is feeling a little bit like the show is giving Nadeko short shrift, and I'm kind of getting frustrated about it, because I really want to see her get more development as a character.
Yeah, kind of. It does seem to really want to return things to the status quo every episode. I remember being kind of... I got kind of whiplash after the mushroom episode, because Shinonome really goes through it and like is like subjected to some pretty traumatic terror over the course of that episode, but still manages to literally save everyone's lives. Gets almost no thanks for her efforts, and then in the next episode they almost like belittle her because of it. So because I don't think they want anybody to. They don't want to switch up the relationships dynamic too early. Is the only reason I could get for the just kind of the back to the way things usually were response after all of that had happened. I felt bad for her.
Yeah, especially given that she then ends up getting almost a little bit damseled, right? With though I have to admit, some of those scenes of her, especially when she was like fluffing up the dog and just being like, "I'm gonna call you Anthony now." I was like, "Oh my god, I love these moments." Yeah. I just
she's
ate
my favorite
those
character.
Up. She's wonderful.
I think her voice work is really good too. I think it's is it Hina Kino? I think I remember when she screams when that dude just falls over dead. I instantly went, "Oh, that is Hinako." Who is just like the worst character on that show. She's very good at screaming into a microphone.
Wait, is she the dumb one? Is she the really dumb one?
Yeah, the rich girl. I think she's basically kind of the main one. Yeah.
Yeah. I do appreciate that energy with the show. Like, I like the show when it lets the girls be a little bit more gremlin-like. Oh, I suppose I should mention the fan service thing. So the fan service in the most recent episode, Nadeko is put, if I remember right, it's Nadeko who's put in, like, multiple outfits that are quite revealing and does not seem to enjoy it and is kind of force-stripped to be put in those outfits by these kind of, like, pig creatures. Or that used to be humans, but like pig people. Don't love that.
All right, we will pull the train whistle and keep on going along. Next up, we have Tonari no Yokai-san, for which we have a report from D. This one is just kind of nice and chill, is kind of the general consensus around this one. It's exploring themes of tradition and modernity and found family and like loss and grief and the passing of time, especially with, the characters who are supernatural and immortal. And it's doing a pretty thoughtful job of all of these things. The characters are likable and fairly well-rounded, but I think it's kind of suffering a little bit from... It's in the same genre as things like Natsume's Book of Friends and Eccentric Family, which are very, very good, and this one's just fine. So D says, the genre and themes are solidly in my wheelhouse. It'll expect to be one of those shows that I like well enough and then forget about soon after finishing it. A point to mention as well along here is that there is a young girl with a crush on a centuries-old Tengu, but there's no indication the crush is reciprocated, so D hasn't given it that much thought and much fuss, which, fair enough. We've all had a crush on a centuries-old Tengu. That's just like a normal adolescent thing that everybody goes through. So thank you, D, for those notes. Next up, a different kind of supernatural creature. We have Kaiju number 8, which seems to be kind of a big Shonen Jump blockbuster for the season. How is that going?
Well, I am current on the manga, so I have a bunch of... I know what's going to happen mostly. So I'm curious what Tony's fresh eyes have seen from the series.
Okay. I mean, I'm mostly enjoying it. I'm a bit miffed that we're getting into kind of just regular old battle shonen territory with the most, recent episode where it's just like, oh, there's a big battle with the big kaiju that makes a bunch of little kaiju, and then all the characters have these different... Cut away to this character fighting a kaiju. Cut away to that character fighting a kaiju. And I'm just like, oh my god. Why am I watching this?
Okay, well... that's basically my big complaint with the series. I think a lot of shonen MCs in particular kind of get their edges rounded off, and I really feel like that happened at high speed with Kaiju number 8. Kafka, his big things are like he's middle-aged and he is kind of a use to the team because he knows so much from...
Sorry.
Huh?
Can I?
Not you calling someone 32 middle-aged.
Everybody perceives him as middle-aged in the series. Is what I'm saying.
Oh my god.
Yeah. I mean,
he's
certainly
I'm
by
older
the
than
standards
Kafka,
of...
so I don't share their feelings. But Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to.
They're like, oh man, you're so old. But he, like, his big advantages are he's knowledgeable about kaiju because he had like a very he worked like a menial labor job cleaning up kaiju, which turns out to be super valuable, right? Which I thought was a cool angle. Not so important as he just becomes someone capable of punching kaiju to death. And yeah, then they kind of just, I don't know, the fact that he's older than everybody else kind of just becomes a running gag. So I didn't like that. Also, yeah, I feel like the whole setup of the series is they're like soldiers fighting these giant kaiju, but that doesn't make for very dynamic battles. So they're almost forced into this scenario where you learn that characters are main characters because they actually don't use a gun, they use a melee weapon because that's more dynamic. And then if they use a melee weapon, how do they fight a big kaiju? So most of the kaiju start being more human-sized. So they're just fighting like demons with melee weapons after a certain point. And it's less like kind of military working together, just people having big duel type fights. So it becomes very just kind of standard battle shonen fare after that, and does some other unfortunate things.
That's really disappointing because, like, I mean, that's one of the things I really liked about the first 2 episodes. I especially liked when Kafka turned into his kaiju form that was deeply inhuman, right? But then suddenly after that, all we ever see is the humanoid kaiju form of him, and I'm like, really? I liked seeing him turn into a giant horrible monster. Like, that was interesting, right? You know, to think about what would you do if you have this absolutely horrific thing that's inside of you always trying to escape, right? That is part of you now. Like, that's interesting. But, yeah, and in terms of gender stuff, I feel like I wasn't quite as bothered, I think, as you were, Peter, about Kikuru needing to kind of get saved, you know, during her arc, because I found it kind of intensely relatable, and also it's, like, very heavily foregrounded that she protected all of her classmates in a really meaningful way. Oh, wait, it's what you were mentioning, Alex. That's right, you were the one who mentioned that to me. I wasn't as bothered as you.
Oh, yes, yeah. So I made a note, yeah, that, like, when I read the first couple volumes of the manga, I was kind of annoyed that, like, this sort of teenage girl protege kaiju fighter is set up as being, like, the best ever. And I'm like, that's pretty cool. She's, you know, she's obnoxious, but she's a young woman who's a professional at this. And then it's like, oh, of course, she's set up as the one to beat, basically. So Kafka has to save her. Immediately she is, like, knocked out of her depth and he has to save her, which, like, you know, it makes sense as a stakes establishing thing, that you're like, all right, he's the best in the biz, oh no, something that even they can't deal with has happened, and so the protagonist, you know, gets to establish their chops. Fair enough. It just, yeah, it had that bit of a gender dynamic that annoyed me, that it was just like, here's this girl, she, you know, she thinks she's hot shit, but she has to just be rescued. You know, there's other female characters who, well, actually, I'll return. Maybe we'll return to this point later in the series, Peter. But I, for example, thought it was very cool that his kind of, not mentor, but his friend who he's aspiring to sort of catch up with. Mm-hmm. She's a woman, so she's like this very competent female character. I'm like, that's cool. I sure hope that this is not going to establish a pattern where he, like, admires all these professional kaiju fighting women, and then he has to save them or outdo them to prove his shonen protagonist chops. I sure hope that's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it does, because I'm not keeping up with this one, but that feels like something that will be talked about further down the line, if that is the case.
It certainly sounds possible, doesn't it?
Yeah, okay, I'm feeling very cynical about your tone. It's not filling me with hope.
Yeah. I do think it also served, at least in the first case with him rescuing her, I think it kind of was maybe more out of need to have her narratively be brought into the fold of people who knew that he was able to transform into a kaiju. So that one didn't bother me. I was kind of, I kind of read very hyper aware of that when I'm reading any new shonen fighting series these days. It's just something I'm like, I don't know, I'm very keyed in on usually. So in that one, I kind of realized there was some like utility there because they kind of needed an excuse for him to have transformed in front of her without her just instantly killing him or trying to kill him immediately. But yeah, there's I am kind of pretty low on the manga right now. So
Well, at least it's not JJK.
Well. Oh dear. Sorry, people who sincerely like shonen who listen to this show. It's often not that impressive in terms of the things that we want to talk about, both as critics through the lens that we are critics through and also just our personal taste. Maybe it's because we're all middle-aged.
I promise there are...
In my case, that could certainly be it. Yeah.
I promise there are battle shonen I like. Okay, there's one battle shonen. It's called Chainsaw Man. But that counts!
Okay. Oh, does that count? I like a lot then. Yeah. I mean, like, we watch out Naruto, some Hunter x Hunter, man. Love that stuff. One Piece has its positive points, but Chainsaw Man, yeah, masterpiece. Love it. The first arc only of The Promised Neverland, very good.
Does that qualify as... Oh, I was going to say, I guess that is definitely a shonen. I was going to say, does that qualify as a battle shonen? Have they got those kids out here just, like, fighting people? Probably.
Mm-hmm. They're just fighting with their brains in that series, so...
Well, towards the end, they fight with their fists, too,
Cool.
So...
Oh, and guns, actually.
Good. Unleash those...
Yeah.
Unleash those kids.
Yeah.
Let them go feral. Okay, moving to a completely different genre.
Speaking of feral children...
Okaeri, or as I have been calling it... or as I've been calling it, the Omegaverse Domestic Bliss Simulator. You did the premiere review for this one, Toni, and bounced off it quite hard. Just as a quick refresher for the folks at home, can you remind us, like, what you didn't really like about it?
I didn't like that the show seemed to be so interested in exploring this, like this weird allegory for societal oppression that didn't seem to have any actual depth to it. Through the Omegaverse stuff, but then seemed completely, utterly uninterested in exploring actual experiences of homosexuals, except for as a domestic bliss simulator. And then also, I hated that the baby, that the toddler, as Caitlin pointed out later in her 3-episode review, is just like so utterly perfect as to be uninteresting. And also...
Yeah.
Just nothing happens in this goddamn show. There's no... And the characters just feel like cardboard cutouts. Like any good slice of life show, the characters have to feel interesting. And these do not.
So yes, all of that definitely, and as you said as well, yeah, Caitlin gave this a very low score for toddler characterization, in my professional opinion. The upshot of all of this is that now I am the one on staff watching this show and feeling very underqualified to talk about it, but by God, I'll do my best. Fun detour for context. Omegaverse began in, like, English language fanfic, often tied up with erotica, and not always, but sometimes associated with werewolves, hence alpha and all that, which, like, the concept of the alpha wolf has been debunked long ago, but let's not let something silly like actual science get in the way of a kink meme, right? And then here's Tadaima Okaeri, which is an original piece of Japanese fiction that is extremely chaste and has nothing to do with werewolves. Unless there's, like, a big twist coming in the second half, which case, ooh, that would be exciting. But anyway, I bring this up because the genre context is always interesting, but also it kind of seems like the show is expecting the audience to know that context. It's running on a lot of assumptions. For example, it assumes I think a toddler is cute, and I don't. I think a toddler is incredibly annoying. Same as you, Toni. But more pressingly, it's like it's operating on a lot of assumed knowledge and just dropping these concepts and terms without really offering any kind of explanation for them, like alphas and omegas and mated pairs and going into heat. And it just doesn't tell you what these things mean, either in a showing way or a telling way. And that raises a question for me about, like, who this show is for. And I don't mean that in the way of, like, ew, who would watch this? I mean it like, it's clearly operating within the shared language of the subgenre and assuming the audience already speaks that language, which means that if you're not already familiar with the tropes and the setup of an Omegaverse story, you are left very confused. But I feel like, and I am purely speculating here, that if you were big into Omegaverse, you might find this show very boring and unappealing, and would be asking, why is this so weirdly sanitized? And like, where are the sexy bits in this set of tropes that comes from like erotica and kink? Like, the ABO stuff makes a really odd set dressing if the actual sexual aspect of it isn't being addressed. Does that make sense? Like, and that's important because, as you said before, Toni, the world building being so undercooked means that we end up with this really strange setup where like the show realizes that it can't just be fluff all the time, it needs to have conflict, but doesn't want to do anything too dark, so it gestures very vaguely in the direction of like Omegas being this oppressed group that's ostracized by society, but it never shows this on screen, so we don't really understand why or what that means, and so your brain tries to fill in the gaps with your own knowledge of real world marginalizations, and the whole thing starts to feel like a really uncomfortable half-baked allegory. Like, there's a plot line where the alpha husband's family are all like, they're all about traditional values and they don't initially accept the marriage. So okay is anti-Omega sentiment like homophobia? But then again, there's all this stuff about how people normally marry within their own type and only alphas get to live in the nice suburbs. So is it a class thing? Is this like a caste system even? And then you have to ask, Omegas seem to be the ones who can get pregnant and raise children, so like, is anti-Omega sentiment just misogyny? In this world where men and women exist, where we also have this third group that gets all the sexism? I don't like I'm doing the thing that I always do in my like bad isekai reviews, where like none of the characters actually hook me, so I'm forced to focus too hard on the world building, and then I think too much about it, and the whole thing crumbles to dust.
I was gonna say, one of the things that most confuses me is, like, I was always under the impression that, like, the part of the entire point of it, Alpha and Omega, is that, like, alphas have sex with Omegas, and it's a kink, like, BDSM power thing. So I was always confused with this whole, like, alphas only date alphas, Omegas only date Omegas, or marry Omegas. So I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, like, if they gave me any world building about what any of this meant, then I would be more not on board with it, but, you know, I would be more willing to pick up what it's putting down. But yeah, so it's like, I have a very cursory knowledge of these tropes, and similarly to what you did, Toni, I watched this with somebody who had, you know, more of a knowledge than me, and he was equally confused. He was like, well, this usually means this, but I have no idea what it means in this very, like, in the context of this particular world. And so, yeah, I'm just like, okay, so, like, what is an alpha? How do you tell someone is an alpha? By looking at them. They mention pheromones at one point, and I'm like, okay, so, but you're not, huh? Anyway, yeah, we made a joke. We're just like, well, but how do alphas, Omegas, they seem to be very, like, gender essentialism / like just top bottom coded. So we were like, how does a society function? Surely two alphas who are two tops can't actually have sex with each other, because how would that work?
Oh, Alex.
These are real questions that I have.
I was literally just gonna say, like,
shit to me.
Like, have we seen Omega Society yet? Is it like just like a whole society of people just bumping purses? You know? Is it like,
we haven't. No. So the main character, the wife husband, who, by the way, has another baby and is pregnant, and they just skip over that completely.
Oh my god.
And they're just like, he went into heat and was kind of sick and had to take medicine for a while, and then is pregnant. I'm like, wait, so did they fuck off screen? When did that happen? Anyway, now they have an adorable, annoying toddler and an adorable, annoying baby also, is the upshot of all of that. And I just... and I feel so mean saying this. I am not anti-baby by any means. Babies, children, they're just tiny humans. They're just doing their thing. It's fine. So I want you all to know that what I say next does not reflect any sense of violence I have against real kids. I want to kick this toddler over the fence. I'm sick of this kid.
Shit. He's got PBS, perfect baby syndrome.
He does. He's like, well, see, this is the question that I have. I'm like, this kid is way too smart for like a 2-year-old. But now I'm like, oh, is it because he's an alpha? And alpha babies are super precocious? Like, I don't know.
I definitely don't. I haven't
means.
associated domestic bliss with anything I've heard about the Omegaverse, so I was very surprised by the concept behind this.
Yeah, and like, I mean, certainly for the first Omegaverse anime, it makes sense to do one that is very, for want of a better word, family friendly.
Like how you said the first.
Maybe it will be end up being the only, but I don't know. Maybe it will hold the door open for the next one that will actually be a bit better. I don't know. So. Anyway, that was a long journey to say that I don't think the show is very well put together, and it is very confusing in its attempts to talk about social oppression and marginalization. Because, again, it's kind of vaguely gesturing towards this idea, this quite dark idea that, like, oh, Omegas are so... they're treated so badly in society, and to be born an Omega is to just, like, hate yourself. Like, there's a point where someone makes a comment, they're like, oh, if the baby's an Omega, maybe it'd be better to just terminate the pregnancy, you know? And I'm like, excuse me? If you're gonna just drop really severe things like that, can you give me some context? If we're gonna try to talk about marginalization and prejudice. But it's like, no, look at the little baby. Isn't he cute? He's holding a toy. I'm like, get that baby out of here and explain the world building to me. But that's not what the show is going to do. So that's Tadaima Okaeri. On to something that's actually about wolves.
All right.
Peter, how's Spice and Wolf?
I mean,
I'm going to go recover from all of that.
I'm not sure if I have too much to say. I mean, what hasn't been said about this series already for the past 15 years? It's much talked about, much praised, but, you know, it's always been undercut. Even though the relationship between Hollow and Lawrence is very... I think I love a lot of their dialogue. I love the way their relationship works, where they kind of have this this transactional sort of film over it, where it's kind of like precocious. How whenever they like value somebody's the other one's presence or trying to compliment them or something, they always kind of put it in terms of monetary exchange, how they owe each other various things for certain services rendered and all that, which is very cute. But it undercut by the fact that Hollow has taken the form of like a 15-year-old girl and Lawrence is in his mid-20s. I mean, we all knew about that already pretty much, unless you're really coming into this super fresh. So, I mean, until I have not watched, I think I've only watched the first like 5 or 6 episodes of the original series. I don't know how far it gets, so I don't really even know how long this has to go before it's breaking into new territory. I imagine that was the intention of making this anime, because they wanted to remake it and actually continue with the storylines that the other anime never got to, or I'm not sure if they took any creative liberties with the original one, like, say, an original Full Metal Alchemist type thing. I feel like nothing has significantly changed enough that any prior criticisms don't stand.
Yeah. Okay.
Quick general question: is Hollow keeping her clothes on, or is she finding more excuses to get naked every episode?
I wouldn't say not every episode. It certainly starts out with him finding her in his wagon, lying naked in all the furs. I believe even after she transforms into a giant wolf, which I think destroys all of her clothes. In one of the more recent episodes, but I believe that she quickly finds something to cover herself with again, or he like throws his coat over her really fast, something like that. So I think outside of the first couple episodes, it doesn't really make a great effort to find excuses to make her naked over and over again, although she is kind of flirty with him, so I wouldn't say it goes to great lengths not to sexualize her either.
This is a very, very esoteric question, but does the economics theory feel like vaguely neoliberal, lefty, or like, I don't know, just what will this make me want to pull my hair out as somebody who is very interested in, say, Marxist economics?
I think the approach is purely from like a hyperfixative historical fascination. Similar to something that you'd get out of a Kaoru Mori type work. I think they're just really interested in that time period and like how people lived. I don't think they have any particular opinions or want to qualify whether like what they're doing is superior or inferior or to anything we're doing today, or maybe even like a knowledge of things like Marxist theory that they might compare these economics against. They just are maybe even basing, especially with Spice and Wolf, I think they probably are basing some of the plots off of like actual things that happened, like this change in the value of certain types of currency based on the quantity of true silver that it had in it. It seems like something that actually probably happened, so they're adapting it to the narrative. So I don't think they are trying to make any statements in regards to anything that happens.
Oh, okay.
Well, back to the modern day. Next we have Jellyfish can't swim in the night, which... Remember how I said earlier how things might move up and down in the digest space? This one sprouted a few red flags.
I despise Koharu with such a passion. She's such a poorly written character. Well, I don't know if she's poorly written so much as just like, what the fuck is she doing in this show, sort of thing. It's like, this sort of person definitely exists,
that's a really good
but
question.
she should be in more of a psychological horror show, not in this cute, fluffy show about, aspiring idols.
Yeah, so, like, for context, folks, I hate that I even have to say this. So, like, I was having a thought watching along, I'm like, it's kind of nice that they, like, the sort of little bits of intrusive fan service from the first couple episodes, they've really tapered off. And then this happened, where, like, what are they? It's, like, Kiwi and Kano are away on this, like, training course trying to get their motorcycle licenses, which is cool as hell, good for them. And then there's this, I don't know how old she's supposed to be, but there is this older woman there who talks about how she's had, like, all this plastic surgery to look the way she wants, and she's had a boob job. And one of the first things she says to Kiwi when they're just, like, hanging out, she's like, hey, what cup size are you? And then Kiwi's kind of like, weird thing to ask me, but Kano has no problem with her. And the long and short of it is, the three of them end up in, like, a bathhouse hanging out, where this grown woman is like, hey, yeah, here are the medically enhanced boobs I have. Boing, boing, have a look at them, have a feel. And they're like, ooh, interesting. And it's fucking weird and gross. It's okay, of course, because she has a throwaway line where she's like, oh, you guys are still in high school. I hope this isn't a crime. So you see they acknowledge that it's gross and probably illegal. So it's fine to continue with the boob joke. So out of nowhere, no idea what it adds to the story, I felt very, very uncomfortable.
It's one of those things that makes you suddenly mistrust a show, right? Like, it's one of those things where you're just like,
yes!
I don't know if
exactly.
I can trust this show to handle anything anymore, right? Like, this show is starting to go in interesting directions with certain, like, darker ideas, about, like, being a hikikomori with the Kiwi, right? And
yeah, and her sort of social anxiety and bullying and things like that.
Right, and then this happens and it makes me be like, I don't know if I'm ready for the show to go anywhere heavy again, because they did not handle this very well, and so can I trust it to handle very much else very well? I don't know.
Well, and that's a pain, because when this show is good, like when it's playing with some of its ideas, it's really good. Like, it has a really sweet and sincere and I think very real depiction of, like, when you're young but also wherever you are throughout your life, the kind of tension between, like, wanting to be seen and understood versus the mortifying ordeal of being known, and being like, that tension between, like, everyone look at my art, oh my god, no one look at me though, Jesus Christ, and, like, the way that, like, the content you produce and the things that you create can get, like, tied up in your self-esteem. It does a really good job of talking through that. And there's a really, I think you mentioned, I think, how much you like this episode, Toni. I think it's episode 5 or 4, where The girls go viral, but then Mahiru, our main artist character, starts getting all these shitty comments. He'll be like, "Oh, the art's kind of crap though. Oh, it'd be really cool if like they commissioned someone else to do the art for this. It seems very amateurish." And despite the pep talks she gets, and despite trying not to internalize it, it really eats away at her in a way that I felt was that kind of hit hard, you know. And it depicted the impact that might have on a young person very well.
Yeah, I really...
Also, the show's gay.
Yes.
Kinda.
It's very, very heavily implied that the two co-leads are going to get together, or are in the process of getting together. I mean, for goodness sake, one of them basically says, like, the entire reason I got a motorcycle license is just because I imagined how wonderful it would be to, like, ride with you, like, behind me, right?
Yeah, and, like, there's a really, like... Yeah, a really cute bit earlier where, like, they're rolling around in the snow, kind of goofing around, and Kano, like, gives my hero a little kiss on the cheek, and then they're both like, huh? Ha ha ha. Wow, that was weird. Never, don't worry about that.
Right.
So, that would be lovely. So, if it didn't have a whole fucking scene in the 7th episode with, like, this weird, like, age gap flirting boob nonsense...
Predatory lesbian.
I would be really excited. I would be really excited for, like, the potential of exploring queer relationships and queer identity in this show. But now, as you said, Toni, I don't know that I can trust it to do that in a way that is not weird. Or at the very least, you know, if it even if Mahiru and Kano end up having the most beautiful, little sapphic romance ever, fuck it, the weird predatory lesbian age gap boob flirting thing is still gonna be in there.
We don't even know whether that character ends up being a larger part of the show, right? Because it seems to me that Kiui, it's unclear. Like, there's multiple ways of reading Kiui's hesitance to meet up with this person in person, right? Mm-hmm. Like, on one hand, you could read it as Kiui. I think we talked about this on the NFM Discord, too. You could read this as Kiui, like, picking up on the fact that this person is not is not good news, right? Mm-hmm. And probably she needs to do what she needs to protect herself from her. Or at the very least that this person is coming on to her and she is not interested, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Which is the direction I hope the show goes with her, but at the same time, like, I also hope that it doesn't pursue that any further, because, quite frankly, in this show, I'm not that interested in watching Kiui try to fend off some predatory lesbian, right? That's not what I'm interested in watching.
Just my question again of, like, what does it add to the narrative of the show? Like, what does this new character do for the themes and the, like, it feels like it's going to be, if they do go into that, it's going to be, like, piling on more than it has the time to get into in a meaningful way. And, yeah, such a late edition of I'm losing my thread. I'm just, like, I'm yucked out by it, and I am worried about where it's going to go and how it's going to be handled, so... You just continue. It was
so wild.
While I like cringe in the corner. You please continue.
Well, it was just wild that, like, during the scene where they're fondling this lady's boobs, it literally blocks out the whole screen and has it censored.
Yeah.
Like, presumably as a joke, and I'm just like, really, y'all?
I hope that's not for the BD release or anything.
Oh, God,
Oh, my fucking God, I hope not. Like, please do not give us do not make this like a redo of Healer thing or whatever, you know, where it's like just...
That was the title.
Pleasantly... What?
That was the title, yeah.
Yeah, you know, just... It was... The fact that they had to do that, I think, speaks volumes about how inappropriate that moment is, right? Like, if you have to do that... Not that sex shouldn't be shown, right? I love a good sex scene. But, like, if you censor it because it's obviously, like, borderline child porno, you know? Then maybe don't include it!
But again, it's fine, because she has an offhand line where she's like, oh, haha, I hope this isn't illegal, because you're teenagers. And I'm like, if you have, just don't, like, it's the classic thing of just, like, we're gonna have this character do something heinous, but we're gonna have a little jokey joke about it to show that we acknowledge it, and it's like that means nothing if you just, like, uncritically continue to do the thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's just like, I am aware of what I am about to do. And you're like, okay, great. So you know that you shouldn't be doing it then.
Yeah, just like, someone...
Don't you get that makes it worse?
Yeah, because it means you thought about it and did it anyway.
Yeah, and then Kiyui, I really hope that it doesn't become this thing where Kiyui's hesitant to hang out with her because she needs to come out of her shell and embrace life, and this person, this creep, is going to help her embrace life. That would be the worst way that this show could make that, could further Kiyui's plot and this creep.
God.
Do we want to move on?
Yeah, so if we keep turning Jellyfish over, we're gonna be here all day. So look forward to the end of season wrap up about that one and seeing where the fuck that ends up going. I'm afraid. And again, pissed off because the parts of the show that are good are quite good, and the parts of the show are bad are deplorable. So that's gonna be fun. Next we have Yatagarasu. Which I don't have. Okay. So the reason this one is so high on the list is because I was interested in how the first episode dedicated basically all of its runtime to the female characters, who, can often get lost in the shuffle in these sort of historical, political pieces about succession and assassination and the looming spectre of war and kingship. And I thought it was neat that this show chose to open and introduce itself to the world by giving a spotlight to the ladies and only visiting the male characters for a small section of the episode. And then subsequent episodes completely flip that ratio.
No.
Which, it makes the pacing odd. There's a lot of time passing. Characters will make references to how, this kid's been working for the Crown Prince for a month now. And I'm asking, well, what have the brides been doing for that month? Surely they're doing something and, talking to each other and progressing as characters. It's weird. It kind of just, it places them sort of in limbo until about episodes 6 and 7, where they become much more directly relevant. I don't know. I feel like it's not as if the women are badly written or the show is uninterested in them. It's just, got different priorities. And the way that's set aside is frustrating. It's not that I don't enjoy the Crown Prince plotline. It's cool. There's intrigue. There's sword fights occasionally. But the show really hooked me with this promise of giving a perspective to the women. And so every time it gives me an episode that's 20 minutes of dudes and 5 minutes of ladies instead of the other way around, which is what the premiere was, I get a bit annoyed because I feel like it set me up with the wrong expectations, all the bride candidate characters are pretty prominent in the opening and ending credits. So I do have hope that they're going to get more time and more plot relevance. It just, it feels like it's setting that up. It just hasn't quite given it to me yet. So the short review of this one is that the midpoint, that hasn't quite happened yet. I don't have too much to say about them at the moment, but I have my fingers crossed that I will have more to talk about with regards to these ladies at the end of season wrap up. And from there, we may as well fly along to Whisper Me a Love Song. Hopping genres again completely. You had a question.
I have a
about
question
this
for
one,
you
Tony.
about this.
Yeah.
So, Vrai described Himari in their premiere review as being so completely daft and unaware of how she's coming across that she might as well be an excitable sea cucumber who walks among us. Has she stopped being that?
So I have good news on that front. So the good news is, so two things to talk about here. From the early point of the show, it starts with this big dumb miscommunication. We have moved past that. In fact, we're in a whole new status quo now, where not only are the girls aware of each other's, sort of romantic feelings, but Himari has an arc where she has to be self-aware and has to sort of look deep within herself and be like, well, hang on, what is this feeling that I am feeling for this other girl? I've gone on this whole thing being like, oh, it's love at first sight, but is it? Hang on, what are my feelings? And she does get to a point where she says, yes, let's try it out. Let's try for a real proper romantic relationship. Because she's worried as well. She has this whole thing. She's like, well, I think I have a crush on her, but what if we go for a relationship and it doesn't work out? I wouldn't want to do that to someone that I care about, especially if, like, it's my fault because I'm, like, you know, leading her in the wrong direction by not being sure of my feelings. It's very sincere. She works through all of that, and they do. Most recent episode, we have hit a point where they've said, yep, let's go out together, let's be girlfriends, and just see how that works, which is very sweet. And so she's, yeah, so through all that process, she's less sea cucumber-like. She's, you know, she's been forced to have some interiority, she's been forced to tone it down a bit, and, like, she's a little... She comes across as a little bit less dense because we're seeing her thinking through things. So that's, you know, that's good news if that was something that annoyed you about the early episodes. I can absolutely understand why she would tick people off. I find her a bit annoying, but I also have a lot of sympathy for her because I have also been very stupid in my youth and more recently in terms of, but what are my feelings? What's going on? I mean, like, it's a valid question, right? I'm glad that, like, this and A Condition Called Love are right next to each other in this list because they're kind of in conversation with each other nicely in that they're both shows about teenagers trying to navigate relationships and being like, well, what is romantic love? How do I know that I'm feeling it? How do I know that I'm not just going to make a big mess of things if I try to pursue these feelings with someone I find interesting? Can someone please give me a nice instruction manual on how to date someone without causing trouble? And I'm like, no, there is no instruction manual that will perfectly work. If someone says there is a perfect instruction manual, they are trying to sell you something, and don't listen to them. So, look, Whisper Me a Love Song, it's sweet. It's a very... I mean, we're going to talk about Condition Called Love in a minute. This one is obviously the gayer version of those, those kind of concepts, and it's very, like, sort of fluffy and sincere take on it. It's very, like, you know, what do we do to be happy? Kind of getting past this point of, like, trying to narrow down a very precise definition of romantic attraction and just being like, do you like spending time with this person? Do you want to cook for them? Do you think about them? You know, does being with them make you glad to be around and alive and make the world a little brighter? Just don't overthink it and just pursue that. And I think that's going to be what the second half of the season is, as well as some, like, band drama. That's kind of exciting. We lost girls' band cry in the licensing shuffle, but we have at least one other show about girls in bands getting up to shenanigans. So Whisper is giving us that.
But do they
as
cry?
Well, so. Do they? Yeah, there's a little bit of tears, there's a little bit of melodrama, there's a love triangle kind of thing happening in the background. Although not really a love triangle, so much as, like, one of Yori's friends very nobly being like, hey, I'm, like, going to Himari and being like, hey, I'm in love with this woman, just a heads up. And I was content to just, like, pine silently, as many a lesbian best friend has done in the past, in the various genres. But it looks like we're all lesbians in this one, so actually, hang on. I need to talk to you about this. I don't know, it's kind of sweet. You know, she's not presented as antagonistic or anything, but she's very straightforward, like, hey, listen, I care about this girl, and if you string her along and break her heart, I'm gonna be really pissed off. So, like, if you're gonna do that, maybe just don't date her and let me date her instead. And that lights a fire under Himari's butt to be like, actually, okay, yeah, I'm gonna go for it. And then, yeah, the poor pining best friend is like, yay, I'm so happy for you both. Oh, god damn it. So that's a very interesting dynamic. That's a very interesting dynamic that I'm gonna, enjoy watching unfold. So it's sweet, you know. It's the main reassurance I have about this is that it's moving along. I think, as I said in, like, the 3-episode check-in, some shows would be content to let this, like, miscommunication, figuring out your feelings shit go on for, like, episodes and episodes, but halfway through the series, they are solidly in a relationship. Everyone knows what's going on. You know, we're going to move on to what comes next, so that's good. So yeah, its thematic pair this season is A Condition Called Love, which you were also caught up on, Peter. How are you feeling about this one?
At the end there, I thought you were actually describing it when you were talking about, don't overcomplicate it, just see how you feel. Do you want to cook stuff for them? Do you want to make them happy? I was like, oh, that's literally the main character. That's Hotaru just trying to go, like, Do I like being in a relationship? Oh, gee, I don't know. This stuff sure is complicated.
Yeah, again, we have these two shows like perfectly complementing each other.
Which I think is the part that I like about it. I think by necessity, the show has to spend a lot of time kind of like in her head, which can kind of make it harder, I think, to appreciate someone's personal revelations, especially when they're intellectualizing everything so much. But I think the show finds a good balance in kind of her portraying like her unawareness of her own feelings, and her kind of just this very detached sort of analysis of the things that are going on, with kind of these interspersed like personal revelations where she's like, oh, that is how I feel, isn't it? I actually am doing this because I'm hoping he'll smile or something because that makes me feel good. Oh, it does make me feel good, doesn't it? That kind of stuff, which is cute. I definitely like
cute.
that, and I'm really interested in like her backstory, whatever went on with her friends in middle school that caused her, I think, has kind of led her to this sort of pulling back from romantic relationships. But I guess the inevitable thing to talk about is Hananoi, because I was pretty surprised in part to prepare for this podcast. I read Caitlin's first episode review. I was pretty surprised how much grace she gave Hananoi. That's not criticism. I just, because like personally, I was kind of getting some really creepy vibes off of him. I think she was kind of wanting to see how the narrative treated it, and believed that the narrative was kind of telling you that what he's doing is not normal, which I do mostly agree with, but also it's been kind of going on for half the season now, and I'm not sure what it's trying to tell me anymore about his inappropriate behavior.
Yes, so he is interesting to me. I want to give a shout out as well to Colleen of Colleen's Manga X, who ages ago did a video, sort of like an analysis slash recommendation of this series, which I watched before I watched the anime, and I think helped me appreciate and sort of pick up what the show is putting down. Because I think, like, if I had not had a reassurance that, like, oh, this is, this is really thinking about this is kind of like taking these ideas apart and putting them back together, I would have just been yucked out by Hananoi and just, like, bounced. Because, again, he is interesting to me. I'm not sure that I'm always enjoying this show, but I am always fascinated by it because it is such, like, exploration of just, like, kids who obviously, like, have a worldview that's not quite right, but you don't quite know how to unpack it because you are also a teenager. Again, Hotaru, really relatable on that front of just being like, I just want to be a good girlfriend, I don't know how to do that, and I think this is what I'm feeling. And then occasionally her boyfriend just says, like, just some whack shit, to use the professional terminology for it. Like, I'm still thinking about, for example, that bit, I think she mentioned, she's like, do you have any friends? And he's like, well, not really, because I would really rather be dedicated to just one special person. Because, if a building's on fire, wouldn't you rather, save your resources and just try to save just one person? And she's like,
dude, what the fuck?
Yeah. Her and me being like, okay. And I think, like, it's doing it slowly, but it is taking us to a point where it's kind of like contextualizing and unpacking. Like, he's obviously got some sort of abandonment thing going on where he's like, I have to be the absolute most all the time, otherwise people will leave me. And he also has some sort of thing going on where he's like, sorry, I've got in my head that, like, that old video that becomes a meme with the lady's like, I don't need friends, they disappoint me, and then, like, punches the air. He's got some sort of thing going on where he's like, everybody's going to let you down in every kind of relationship, so you have to find your soulmate, and they will never let you down, and then you'll be all good for the rest of your life. And I'm like, that's not correct, buddy. That's not a way to live your life. But it's, and like, he both of them together are slowly discovering, sometimes a relationship is just like being happy to hang out with someone, and you don't need to be the absolute most, and you don't need to overthink everything, and you don't need to have this be like the incredible be-all and end-all, like, possessive, we are the only souls for each other in the universe. like she's coming to a point where she's realizing more how relationships should work. I'm waiting for him to have that same realization, him for being to be a little less intense and weird about it. But so I don't know, I feel like, yeah, midpoint, we are getting there. We're not fully there yet, but I also feel like him getting there is what the story is about, so it may not happen anytime soon.
Well, it does feel like things are going to come to a head with this new introduction of, like, the guy from her middle school or whatever showing up, and Hananoi having an extremely jealous and possessive reaction to that dude's presence in her life, being her coworker.
Yeah.
So I feel like that is eventually something's got to break there, even though they talked about it, and he's just like, yeah, I feel jealous sometimes, and I don't know how to deal with it. I don't feel like that's the end of it necessarily.
That could be a good instinct, yeah, because, yeah, especially, it's gonna be interesting. I am excited to see this man make a friend. Because he needs to, like, again, the whole burning building thing, I'm like, buddy, it's not that complicated, it's not that deep. Sometimes you just have people who you like to hang out with, who aren't your girlfriend. Do you have anything in your life except for your grandma and this girl, the latest girl you've imprinted on like a baby duck?
By intention, I would say he does not. By effort of his own will, I would say he specifically does not want to. These kind of shows walk a fine line. I think it is important to show how, like, a compassion and a good support structure can help people work through, like, whatever. I mean, they both have some past trauma, obviously. His obviously being more severe, or at least leading to more sociopathic tendencies. But also, I think at a certain point, it's just like a character's behavior. It kind of like, my only advice would be seek therapy, and I feel like he's crossed that line at some point here.
So the short review of that one is, we'll see.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of what it is at the mid-season. But, I wish these kids all the best.
As someone who has not watched a single episode of this, it sounds to me like this is the sort of show where your tolerance for it is really going to depend on how much you are okay with watching a show where the male lead sucks shit.
That could. I'm not sure.
There will be an element of that.
Yeah. He
definitely sucks less than other protagonists / love interests, and I think a big part of that is the show being self-aware, be like, no, this boy is not quite right, and we are going to explore that. So he does suck, but in a way that, you have plenty of shows out there where just the male lead / love interest just sucks, and that's how he's supposed to be, and that's supposed to be fine for everybody, including the audience and the love interest. So he's a little different though, but he can be I get quite a visceral reaction from watching some of these scenes, because I'm just like, oh no. But yeah, so it's not gonna be for everybody, but it is very interesting, and that's the main thing it's got going for it for me right now.
Yeah, I would say he's not really abusive toward her. I think the worst thing he probably said was that one line when he's in her house and her mom's cooking them dinner downstairs. He's just like, I said I wouldn't, I'd like keep my hands off, but he kind of implies, like, in this situation, I don't know if I can control myself. And you're like, oh, shut the hell up.
Yes, there are moments like that.
Yeah. But most of it is just kind of unnerving in like kind of his attitude or the way he seems to feel. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Like some of the stuff you could if a different framing device and maybe a different soundtrack, and this could be building up toward a horror movie type scenario.
Yes.
But we'll see where it goes. Yeah.
We will see where it goes. That is going to bring us to the end of proceedings for the day. We have gone through our whole list. Exciting range of genres and highs and lows as usual. Thank you so much for listening, folks. If you like this kind of thing and you want more of us in other podcasts, in feature articles, in reviews, you can head to animefeminist.com. As I mentioned before, we have a Patreon you can check out as well if you want to help us keep the lights on. And as I said before, help point us in the direction of shows you want us to talk about for these seasonal check-ins. All of our socials can be found on our link tree, which is linktr.ee/animefeminist. And oh, we have merch. We have cute t-shirts and mugs and all that kind of fun stuff. You can find that on the store link on our website. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you and good night. If you're gonna catch a train, be careful where it's going, because there might be zombies and or mushrooms. Just be safe out there.